Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's INTAC session entitled Engaging Youth and Families in Residential Care, Strategies and Impact from Research and Lived Experience. We're really happy that you are taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Before we get started, though, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over, and we would definitely love for you to put in the chat box your name and where you're from, what your role is, so we know a little bit about you too.
Hey, Kenny.
As part of our session, we need to provide you with this disclaimer. This presentation was prepared by INTAC under a cooperative agreement from SAMHSA. While this event is supported by SAMHSA, the contents are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of SAMHSA, HHS, or the U.S. government. Also, we hope there are not any security issues that happen today, but in the event that should occur, this session will immediately end and you'll be notified by email how to rejoin a new session. We really do appreciate you being here for one of our INTAC sessions. Listed here are all of our incredible national partners that have come together to use their expertise and their subject matter knowledge to help inform the field by creating products, resources, and sessions like the one today that enhance the behavioral and mental health field. As a center, our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health challenges will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system. We serve a wide cross-sector audience, including everyone from state leaders to providers, to school workforce, infant and early childhood providers, community-based providers, peer supervisors, family partners, youth partners, and much more. Our services range from individual consultations, more in-depth sessions, like the one we're offering today, to peer learning exchanges and tools that will help you. Our aim is to really create those outlets for communication, collaboration, and sharing amongst all of us. Please also make sure to check out all of our resources and our archived presentations on our website, or you can go to the Contact Us link there to request consultation. And we can have somebody drop the link to the website in the box, the chat box. Finally, before we get started, we wanted to make sure you had some answers to some commonly asked questions that come up. In the follow-up email for today's session, which will go out to everyone who's registered, you'll receive a certificate of completion, a link to the recording of the session, and a copy of the slide deck presentation that's being shown. You should also have received a copy of the slide deck in a reminder email that was sent either earlier today, or it may have been yesterday that you got it, if you'd like to access it before today. Okay, now to the good stuff. Now that we made it through all the housekeeping items, we really want to get started. So welcome again. Our session today is about engaging youth and families in residential care. And we want to talk about strategies and impact both from research and from those who have experience going through residential themselves as youth, young adults, and also caregivers. My name is Millie Sweeney, and I'm the Director of Learning and Workforce Development for FREDLA, the family-run Executive Director Leadership Association. We are a partner in INTAC, and so I operate as a TA specialist for the partnership, and I'm going to be the facilitator for today's webinar. I'm thrilled to announce our presenter and an amazing panel of lived experience. Our main presenter today is Dr. Kayla Urvel. She's an assistant professor in the Martha S. Pfizer Center for Women, Children, and Youth at The Ohio State University College of Nursing. Her research, and I've had the opportunity to partner with her in doing research, her research is focused on optimizing outcomes for youth in residential care by providing caregivers with tailored education and support And it's inspired by the time that she spent as a staff nurse in a residential facility when she saw firsthand the challenges that are faced by youth and their families when they're in that setting and when they transition back to the community. We also have an amazing panel. Our panel today includes both caregivers and young adults with lived experience involving residential care. And some operate as youth or parent peer support providers now as well. We have Jen Whistle, and I probably said that wrong, from New Jersey, Jasmine Martinez from Washington State, Mary Bazell from Oregon, Michelle Vance from Washington State, and Rasheen Marshall from North Carolina, although he's from DC. I remember that from your bio. Today, we're going to spend just a minute about the welcome and the purpose behind this webinar. Then we're going to talk about what research says about family engagement and how we put that into practice. And then we're going to get to the meat of it, which is our panel of lived experience, followed by time for discussion and Q&A with our panel and with our research. So to get us started, when you think about a system of care and all the work that you've done, you can see here that it is, the graphic is laid out. In a system of care, we do a lot of work with community-based services and with systems. Residential treatment tends to get left out. Unfortunately, with rare exception, when a family becomes involved in residential treatment, everything else stops. And the child goes here and the family stays there. And they can be disconnected from services. The point is that there will always be children and youth that need this level of care, that require that.
Yeah, the host got me on mute.
That require that short-term intervention based on what's going on with them. But we should make sure that they continue to be connected and collaborate with community services for that continuity of care that's so important for families, for children, and for youth. But historically, we've left them out. So the reason behind this webinar is to bring that into focus and to talk about the importance and strategies for fully partnering with youth and families in this particular service. I'm going to turn it over now to Kayla, who's going to talk about the most current research.
Thanks, Millie. So residential care plays a really important role in the system of care, as Millie just said. And an important component of residential care is family partnership or family engagement. We throw a lot of terms out there, right, to describe how we work with families. And there's some confusion around what family partnership really looks like in residential care. And words matter, we know that. And we need to make sure that as a field, we're using consistent terminology that's really driven by family and youth voices and, again, is consistent. So the first thing I want to talk to you about today is a tiered definition of family partnership that our team created. The figure that we're looking at was developed by Fredla. And if you want, you can scan the QR code and that'll take you to Fredla's website to get a close-up picture of the figure. But on the individual level, the green on the screen, we're calling this family involvement. And this is really concerned with an individual family's involvement with their child in care. Family involvement in activities might include things like maintaining contact between the family and the child, providing family therapy or parent training, those types of interventions. The second level is family engagement. That's the lighter purple area. And family engagement in our conceptualization refers to mutual and respectful and culturally responsive relationships at the program level. So we're moving beyond that individual. From a data-driven standpoint, family engagement data collection includes surveying children and families to improve those services and supports continually. The highest level is family-driven care. And at the family-driven level, families are full partners in all service planning and delivery and evaluation. And here is the level where families are recognized as the eminent expert in their children, and they drive the decisions regarding the services and supports they receive and help with the evaluation of those. So our team looked at the available research on family partnership using these 3 definitions and associated activities. And we reviewed the research to see how consistent existing research is with some of the best practices with family partnership. And so we found 30 studies that met the criteria for the review. And I want to be really intentional here and say that those studies fell into only the family involvement and engagement categories. We were not able to find any studies that found that fell into the family-driven category. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what kinds of activities are published in the research? So family therapy was by far the most commonly described involvement method. Most family therapy, though, was delivered face-to-face. So there was very little mention of teletherapy. And this can be a real barrier for families, especially because very few studies reported providing transportation for families to be able to physically come to the center. And the second most common family involvement activity was family visits. That was discussed in about 60% of our studies. So the distinction here, though, is that families visiting a program was far more common than the youth going home for visits. This makes me pause because many youth transition from residential care back to the community, their home community. And it makes me wonder how youth and families can be successful if home visits aren't occurring, or if they're occurring less frequently than the family coming to the facility. And so one method of preparing youth and families for discharge is certainly by increasing those visits home. And it's long been said, that discharge begins at admission. I'm guilty of saying that myself, but the research really doesn't support that necessarily in residential care across the board. In fact, discharge planning on average begins 6 months after admission. We also know that children who go on home visits are 6 times more likely to complete their program. Yet the research that we found supports that there's a lot of restrictions on home visits. As many as 60% of youth in our studies experienced home visit restrictions based on behavior. And so given the necessity for home visits and their positive outcomes, we really emphasize that home visits are not privileges, they're a core element of the program. Next slide, please. So the belief in family partnership is evident, but belief alone doesn't change practice. And so the next steps for our team is we're looking at the cumulative effects of different family partnership methods on youth outcomes to determine how combinations of different partnership methods may influence outcomes. And the other thing that we largely don't know in the research is how do families prefer to be supported? We don't really ask them in the research. And so this is another key area. I do want to say a quick acknowledgement. There is probably a lot more family partnership going on in the clinical setting that is published in research. There's probably a lot of QI going on, but it doesn't make it to the peer-reviewed research stage. And so a couple of recommendations that we have are partnerships with researchers and residential treatment facilities, partnerships with families as co-investigators and advisory boards. Next slide, please. So our team took some of the key lessons from the literature, and we partnered with 40 family partners, many of whom are in attendance today, which is really exciting. And our family partners brainstormed ideas about how to improve family partnership in residential care. Our team of 40 people came up with over 200 ideas of ways to improve family partnership in residential care, which speaks to the gravity of improvements that can be made, which is really exciting that there's solutions out there. Using sophisticated statistics, we were able to sort those ideas on the most critical family engagement strategies. And so briefly, some of the things that came out from that study was the need to prepare families very early on what discharge looks like, and being really transparent that sometimes discharge isn't always determined by a clinical outcome, but also by insurance and other factors. Our family partners also advised us that we need to have safety plans and crisis plans that are developed with the supports that make sense for an individual situation. So no blanket safety plans. And these plans absolutely must be in place before any sort of home visit and certainly before discharge. Our family partners also suggested that staff participate in family perspective taking trainings to avoid things like accusatory language, and we'll hear a little bit more about that today. We also heard from families that, by and large, parent-peer support before, during, and after residential care was prioritized by families and is the most critical support. Parent-peer support has the potential to bridge the gap between residential care and families. However, sometimes it's underutilized. It's a real resource, though, for families. Last slide, please. If you're interested in seeing our full report, check out the QR code. We published a really nice report together as a group. And so some of the things that we're doing with this study is we're partnering with FREDLA to develop and implement a parent-peer support specific training in residential care. And if you're interested, please email me if you're interested in learning more or partnering. And a huge, huge thank you to all the family partners listed on the screen. Again, many of them are here today, which is really exciting. Their expertise is priceless, and I hope that you'll check out some of their suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. There's also a copy of this that is in the chat if you want to download it from there. It's a great report. So we have, I'm looking, we have about now an hour and 15 minutes to go through our panel. We want to make sure that we have time for discussion and questions. So each panelist that we have is going to share a piece of their experience with residential care. They're going to highlight what did or did not work for them and offer suggestions for effective strategies and approaches that they've learned through experience. We'll have time for discussion and questions following the panel, so please make note of anything you'd like to ask or comment on, and we are intentionally leaving time for that. So each of our panelists are going to speak for about 10 minutes each, which should leave us with at least 10 minutes for discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. So we can highlight our panelists, and we are going to start with Jen. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Kayla and Millie for inviting me to speak about my experience as a parent of a child who received residential care. I'll give you a little background information to provide perspective. When my daughter Abby was born, I, like most parents, imagined she'd have a happy, loving, adventurous, and carefree childhood. Most of that happened, but when Abby was about 10 years old, I saw a shift in her mood. And by the time she turned 12, she was experiencing serious mental health concerns. She was depressed, experiencing suicidal ideation, and self-harming. I was suddenly catapulted into a world I knew nothing about. But that's what parenting is, on-the-job training. I was able to get Abby the clinical help that was recommended by her pediatrician, and she started seeing a psychiatrist and therapist and eventually started taking medication. I tried to educate myself about mental health via the internet. By now, bad move. Some books and courses given by national organizations. And we had a wonderful support system of family and friends that were always at the ready to help out. And despite all of this, Abby's mental health continued to decline. By her third hospitalization, Abby was enrolled in the New Jersey Children's System of Care. Through the system of care, she received a care manager who created a treatment plan and authorized in-home services. She had a therapist and behavioral support that came out for a few hours each week into the home. And I was offered a peer support partner. So meeting my peer support partner, Robin Seabour, was significant in changing Abby's treatment and my family's well-being. Robin educated and empowered me to develop a plan to regain stability for my family. Some things I think that are important to note that Robin taught me were the structure of the New Jersey Children's System of Care, so I understood who I was advocating to and for what reasons. The various levels of care in mental health, getting Abby an IEP and advocating for an out-of-district therapeutic school placement. She taught me how to manage my expectations within the reality of mental health care systems. She taught me how to manage my time, so I was able to support my 2 other children. I learned stress management and self-care skills. She helped me prepare for child and family team meetings. She taught me the importance of documenting behavior and medication changes so I could share that with providers. She helped me utilize effective communication skills to express my family voice and family choice. And most importantly, she taught me the best outcome for Abby would only happen if I engage in her treatment. So at this point, Abby was 15 years old, and in spite of all of these supports, Abby's behaviors increased to the level of being recommended for out-of-home treatment. Robin informed me it was her agency's policy to transition services once Abby's in process for out-of-home treatment. The guidance and knowledge Robin shared with me was invaluable. And with a rah, rah, you got this, Robin transitioned services. So without my trusted companion, I took all that she taught me and forged ahead, determined to help Abby receive the care she desperately needed. As a single parent of 3 children, it was important for my family to have Abby placed in a treatment home as near as possible to our home. I had spent 3 months visiting Abby in a long-term hospital placement that was over 2 hours one way from our home. It made it nearly impossible to participate in her treatment. So I was able to advocate for that, and Abby was placed in a residential home within a half hour of our home. I was able to advocate to my school district for Abby to attend an out-of-district therapeutic school that upon her discharge from residential, she would be able to continue to attend. I thought I was prepared for Abby's intake at residential treatment, but when I left, I felt so overwhelmed. There was so much paperwork to complete, so many documents to provide, having to make doctor's appointments and getting Abby a pregnancy test. I left with what felt like a million questions swirling in my brain. And I thought about what Robin taught me, and I got to work writing my list of questions and concerns. The good news is that at our intake, the majority of staff we met at the residential were very welcoming and friendly, and Abby did not object to going. So Abby's admission to, in New Jersey, we have different levels of residential, and Abby was admitted to a psychiatric community home. It was surreal. As a parent, this was by far the hardest decision I ever made. I was filled with so many emotions: sorrow, fear, defeat, relief, and hope. I could only imagine how Abby was feeling. More than anything, I wanted Abby to know this was not a punishment, but treatment that she needed that I could not provide in my home. The first month of Abby's treatment was a roller coaster of emotions for all of us. As time went on, we settled into another new normal. I was grateful that Abby's siblings were able to have some typical childhood experiences, and Abby was learning to manage her behaviors and emotions. I attended all the treatment team meetings and tried to remember all of the things Robin shared with me. There were many bumps in the road, and many times I wish I had a peer support partner to educate, support, and prepare me for those experiences. Some things that worked in Abby's treatment, well, I have to say, first and foremost, I give all of the glory to Abby. It was her will and desire to be well and her hard work that made this a success. The treatment home had a wonderful clinical staff that was supportive and able to provide Abby with the tools she needed to make sure that she was able to manage her emotions and behaviors. Some of the staff members were amazing, and they would engage the consumers with their preferred activity. And for my daughter and a couple of other girls in the home, they taught them a dance routine and put on a talent show. And Abby learned how to socialize again and have appropriate interactions at home and in the community, because they also, something that Abby did look forward to were the community engagement outings to various destinations in the neighborhood and beyond, but the YMCA, the library. Another thing that was positive, the home Abby was in really provided a lot of accessibility for me and Abby's siblings. I didn't have to wait for a weekend to see her. I was able to call up, and if I was free one evening, I would ask if if Abby was available, could I have dinner with her? And much of the time it was allowed. Abby being in this home ultimately provided the time for our family to heal, and provided the safety that Abby needed. She had 24/7 line of sight supervision. So that was super important in keeping her safe, and certainly made me feel good. Some things that didn't work were some staff did not seem properly trained in dealing with mental health needs. There was no peer support provided, not just for me, but none provided for Abby as well. And I really do believe that it would have been a great benefit for Abby to have someone to provide a positive influence that knew what she was experiencing and would support her without judgment. So because of the lack of peer support, I think it was hard to engage sometimes in her treatment. Like I said, I did attend all treatment team meetings and kind of force my way in there. But I was taught how to do that, through my peer support partner, just to ensure that we had a successful outcome. Abby spent a year in residential treatment. She is now 22 years old and is thriving. She continues to receive outpatient mental health care. She has a part-time job and is a valued employee. She's attending college part-time and studying social work. And she has a wonderful and close relationship with me and her siblings. Ultimately, a large part of our family's success was due to the fact that I had received peer support prior to Abby's admission to residential treatment. I believe if I had peer support while Abby was in residential treatment and she had peer support, it could have possibly decreased the length of her stay. But that's my story. I'm so grateful to share a positive story with you. It was absolutely life-saving treatment for all of you that do what you do. I am forever grateful, and it does work. And I just thank you so much for your time, and I will answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Parent peer support really is a critical piece across every setting, particularly for continuity. So thank you. Jasmine, we'd like to hear from you next.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Jen, for sharing your experiences. So much of what you shared resonated with me and our experience. I wanted to start off by saying that my son, who has lived through the most intensive inpatient and outpatient resources possible, he is beautiful, bright, and brave. He offers this world so much, especially my world. He is a world changer, not defined by any diagnoses, not defined by a label, not defined by his behavior. He makes me better. So I want to start by saying that. I also want to start by saying that as I've grown to advocate with and for my son, not only for, but empowering to advocate with my son, something beautiful that I have had and painful that I have had to learn is sometimes when our children live with extreme mental health challenges, they are beautiful, bright, and brave. They are respectful. They are kind. They are all these things. And sometimes when this is the face of a child who is suffering, that is what is seen. That is the presentation. And it can be really hard to know what a family is experiencing outside of therapeutic interventions, outpatient or inpatient. It can be hard to know what the youth is experiencing because sometimes that sophistication that we find impossible for youth to present with can be very much strong because they themselves, they may want treatment, but actually leaving their family is hard. So keeping that close, right, is going to be hard. I don't want to show you all that I'm suffering. That's going to take me from my family. So what I have learned to say at IEPs, at treatment plan reviews, at outpatient, inpatient, is my son is beautiful, bright, and brave. Yes. And he lives with extreme mental illness. If I only see how beautiful, bright, and brave my son is, if we only look at the glittery parts of him, we do him a disservice because we're not getting him the help that he needs. And equally so, if we only look at the side of his mental illness and his diagnoses and his behaviors, we're doing him an absolute disservice as well. He is both. He needs support, just like I need support for my blood clotting disorders. Psychosis and mental illness, they are health. And our children need support in that way. So I wanted to start by saying that that is where I've grown to come from as a parent, as I advocate with and for my son. But what brought me to this field originally 20 years ago was not my son. It was overcoming my own tumultuous background. I wanted to go in the darkest places to work with those children because I was that child. And so I worked in that field. I worked in a residential facility. I worked on the floor as a milieu counselor. I eventually became director of the behavior management specialty program at that residential facility, not knowing at that time that someday my own son would require that level of care. So I worked there before being a mom, never anticipating that my own son would be in a facility. So I eventually had to quit working at the facility and became full-time advocate. Thankfully, I had that luxury to be able to do that. Not everyone does. And so with that, I wanted to start off by acknowledging that I worked at a facility, and I wanted to humbly note that I had an unintentional bias before walking this rocky, stormy road myself. I had an unintentional bias on how I looked at parents, how I interacted with parents, how I viewed intakes and pre-admits, how I viewed, touring. Let me tell you, once you're on the other side and it's your child that you're having to do an intake for, and it's your child that you're doing a pre-admit for, right? It's hard to see the invisible parts of us. It's hard to see all the hospitalizations, all the advocacy, all the grocery shopping, all the sleepless nights, all the butter knives and the scarves that have to be locked away in lock boxes, all of these things, these stresses, health concerns that lead up just to us getting to the door of a facility. That's not even, other children, work, school. I so wish today I could go back in time and address my unintentional bias and look at those parents differently. I wasn't rude, I wasn't mean, I was compassionate. But how I looked and how I managed those situations could have been different and could have been better, could have been different. And so when it comes to that part, it's hard to understand unless you walk the road. I don't want every clinician to have to walk it to know it. That's not what I want. But something that could have helped me understand differently, because one thing that Dr. Kayla mentioned is how advocates are resources for parents. I want to add to that. Advocates are resources to the clinical team. And had the residential facility I had been working at before being a parent, before walking that rocky road myself, they could have broadened my horizons as I was supporting parents and caregivers at that point in time in a more professional manner. Eventually, my son at age 7 went to a residential facility in Texas. There was not an advocate there, and visits and interactions was very ambiguous. I wasn't certain that I was welcome. I wasn't certain that I was welcome after dropping off my son with missing baby teeth, little body, having to put a 5T to 7-year-old initials on his little pants, dropping off my son. I left not knowing if I was welcome. There is so much uncertainty when we take our children and youth to a facility. One thing that should never be uncertain is that our engagement is welcome. And when I'm talking about engagement, I'm not just talking about engagement for me as a parent, but youth engagement. How are they engaging my son? Because he's going there with his challenges, leaving his family, going to sleep in a bed alone without me, losing more teeth while I'm not there to be the one, having stomach bugs when I can't be there to catch his vomit. These are the things that hurt us as we have to leave our kids behind and entrust. And these are things that advocates can help us walk through. Eventually moving to Washington, I wanted to pause and also say that while my son was in Texas, unfortunately and sadly and horrifically, he endured a trauma while in the facility. This exacerbated the mental illness that the onset at age 5, psychosis, decline in every fashion of his body. But that didn't change the fact that my son still needed intervention. So we moved to Washington. His behaviors declined. His need for intensive intervention increased. So as a parent, I was left with the decision, knowing my son experienced trauma, there wasn't support for me. Me being welcome was ambiguous. Now I'm needed to advocate for my son to go into another facility. And I did, which with much grief, with much apprehension. I had to take my then 11-year-old son into another facility in Washington. Pain is not a word. So what I want to leave with you, though, is that powerful things happen when youth and family are engaged, and it's not gray that they're welcome. It's not gray that they have value. When they're invited to be a part of the team, youth and parent voice. At the facility in Washington, a children's long-term inpatient facility, they had, it was clear when we could visit, where we could visit, at the playground, inside, outside. They had family barbecues. They had family rocket day where our kids created rockets and I was able to go see. Talent show, my son's first ever talent show was in a facility. My son's first ever school picture in a facility. Taking those pictures home, my son got a school picture for the first time at age 11. Wow, this is something that the facility was able to offer. This says, we see you, mama, and we see your son. Another thing that they offered is twice a year family retreats for the parents, where different clinical heads would come in and share about their program, answering questions. They'd also bring in a panel of parents, former parents. I'm now a part of that panel. They would also bring in former youth to share about their experiences, what worked, what didn't work. So much insight gleaned from the youth themselves. Eventually, I want you to know too, that I did not know that the parent advocate position existed until 6 years into my son's upheaval of health. I did not know. Went to 2 different states for treatment. It wasn't until coming to Washington that I was introduced to that role. I knew then that if I returned to the behavioral health field, it would be in this capacity. Because I believe in all that I am and recycling what we've walked through to come alongside other parents and caregivers and youth in their storm. So since then, I became an advocate at a children's long-term inpatient facility in Washington. I want you to know that my son, he discharged during the pandemic, which is very challenging, incredibly challenging. Since discharging 3 years ago last month, he has not been hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital once, the longest run he's had since he was 4. On average, we would have between 8 and 12 appointments a month. On average, we would have between 3 and 6 hospitalizations a year. Day treatment program. My son is now going to the school for the first time, experiencing Valentine. I got to buy my son Valentine's Day gifts for his class for the first time at age 13. These are gifts I believe that happened because of how we were engaged differently, how my son was engaged differently, and how I was engaged differently. I wanted to lastly say a few of the things that we have in Washington that I believe work and make a difference is we have a CLIP Parent Steering Committee, where we offer an additional twice yearly parent training at a hotel, paid for, food paid for, 2-night, 3-day, where we get to sit with our people, where they get to see the look. Yeah, I know. I had to write my initials on my son's pants too. I had to leave my daughter too. And once I became an advocate, I began to know how to advocate through that passion and come alongside parents and caregivers to be a bridge between clinicians and families. Because yes, parents and caregivers are the expert, I believe that, and we are here for a reason. We also have to work with the teams that are given to us and how to receive their expertise as well. And so that is the power of an advocate, is to help us to walk through the shame and the embarrassment and the exhaustion and recognize that this team is they also have a wealth of knowledge that we can grow from and be a part of our benefit. So I believe that the power of a family advocate is critical. Outpatient, inpatient. I also believe that how we engage parents and not making that gray is also equally powerful. You are welcome. And we see you. My name is Jasmine Martinez, and I'm so thankful to be able to share with you today and to be a part of this panel. I want you to know that I believe that hope lives for all of our children. And I believe that through that hope, we can just continue to plant seeds. And I believe that the CLIP facility in Washington helped water the seeds where my son is now flourishing in the community today.
Wow, what a contrast between 2 different types of approaches in residential and the difference it can make. Wow. Mary, we'd like to hear from your experience.
I'm Mary Bazell, and I'm from Oregon, and I am going to talk to you a little bit about training we do for all of our staff. It was originally written by the Oregon Family Support Network, and then I've added to it with my 8 years of experience working as family support in residential setting. And so I am the family partnership coordinator for Trilling Family Services, working with families in residential and day treatment in Mid-Valley, Oregon and Metro Oregon. And I'm a mom of 4, and I had a child who had 2 6-month stays in residential about 10 years ago. And 2 years after that, I took this job because like what you heard from Jen and Jasmine, is that I wanted to give back. I wanted to take what I'd learned and help other families. And this was just pretty much starting maybe a year into at my facility offering this. So I'm a family support specialist, and I supervise a small team, including family support and youth support. We added youth support a year ago. It's been extremely valuable. So I'm going to talk to you some things to maybe consider about families coming into residential, or sometimes any services they could feel this way. Saying I'm a lot, I'm nervous, sorry. So the family perspective, and you've heard some of this already, we feel pretty hopeless and helpless when we're entering services. we don't know how to help our child. We're not absolutely sure what to do. And the things we've tried just don't seem to be working that well. We're exhausted and scared, and our kid is scared. That was the hardest part for me, is seeing just how terrified my child was and just feeling kind of punched in the gut about that. And, you know, remembering that for a lot of people coming into services, this isn't their only show. They may have other children that are in services. They may have a mom who's on hospice. They have other stuff going on in their life when they come in to residential services. So these are things we're telling our staff, because we want them to be aware where families might be at, why they might seem engaged or unengaged. And I'll talk a little more about that. Families, when they come in, they also experience a power differential. When you feel like you don't have any skills, or what skills you have haven't worked, you know, hearing that somebody's a skills trainer might be kind of daunting. A lot of the people you're dealing with are psychiatrists, nurses, other doctors, program supervisors, therapists. They all have titles, and we might not have any. And it can put us at a power differential, make us feel less powerful. So it's really important for our staff to make things an even playing field, that they make it clear that families are welcome there, that they're part of the team. We're unfamiliar with services and acronyms and things. And so we really need staff to be able to explain to us what our options are and what's going on. We might be experiencing our own mental health challenges. I've worked with moms that had traumatic brain injuries. I've worked with moms that have bipolar disorder, experienced bipolar disorder. So they may be working just to keep themselves healthy while they're trying to support their child. And we need to be aware of that, that we don't always know everything that's going on, what's going on in their life. We probably haven't been sleeping. We probably haven't been sleeping very well for a very long time. So we're tired. We had one family come in one time, and they had been taking turns staying up all night with their child for 9 days just to make sure he was safe. And so they might not be themselves. You may not see the real person because they're so exhausted. And this could be going on for weeks, months, years that they've been on this journey. It's pretty overwhelming coming in. So if the kid has, if the family has more than one child in services, when you consider that the children they have probably, and the child they're bringing in has had all these other appointments, doctors, physicals, dental appointments, sports, music, you start to multiply that by multiple children, families are coming in just very overwhelmed. And mountains of paperwork. I remember somebody telling me recently, well, it isn't mountains of paperwork anymore. A lot of it's online. You can go online and do it. And I have sat with so many parents who are trying on their cell phone, this is their online, to try and fill out paperwork for services. I don't know if you've ever tried to fill out a developmental disability application on your phone. It's pretty impossible. I've had many families sitting in my office using my computer so that they can get some of this work done. That's another important part of having an advocate there who can say, "Oh, you can't do that on your phone. Let me help you." So again, overwhelming and exhausting are what most of our families are experiencing. We also tell our staff to remember that there's a trauma connection. And it might not be the trauma you're thinking about, but our families, first of all, we already talked about lack of sleep, isolation. I didn't know anybody else who had kids going through this. So I didn't, my friends were sympathetic, my family was sympathetic, but they didn't really get it. They didn't really know what this all felt like. And you start losing contact with your friends because they'll say, let's go to lunch, and you're at home trying to keep your child safe, or you're attending all these appointments that your child has. So a lot of our families come in, they've already been isolated, and aren't able to do a lot of the normal things they did before their child got ill. They've experienced property destruction, physical violence, some pretty horrendous things a lot of our families come in with. And we might not know all of this. It's not what they might share right up front. they've had a lot of judgment and blame in the community. My child was not the one getting awards at school. I think he got an attendance award at one point, but you know, he wasn't the one who I was getting all the kudos, and I was mostly getting asked if I was, you know, if I'd taken parenting classes for him, or if I'd taken love and logic and things that were more for children who weren't on the autism spectrum and had special needs of their own. We also get traumatized repeating our trauma story over and over again to providers. No one wants to know that your child plays a mean guitar or is really good at basketball. They want to know why you need these services. So they want to know about the holes in the walls and the running away and the things that are really getting you there. So you're traumatized every time you keep repeating this, and you're repeating it all coming back into residential again. Like I said, the mountains of paperwork that you fill out. For me, the trauma came when my son was in those interviews with me. And then how do you explain what's going on without shaming my child? So it was very traumatic. I would come out of those. I love my child. I didn't want to shame him. I knew it was his mental health challenges that were causing the holes in the walls and other behaviors. But, you know, for him to sit and have to listen to some of this. So a lot of times I couldn't be very transparent about really what was going on. Maybe would send an email later saying, I couldn't say this. It was shaming to my child. So there was a lot of guilt about what you were sharing, guilt about what did you do wrong? What could you have done different? How could you have, you know, is there another rock in the state of Oregon to turn over for services? So there's also our families we train that they're experiencing grief. And I lead grief support groups at my church. So I'm not an expert on it, but I've spent 9 years listening to people's stories about grief and their journeys. And the one thing about grief is it's an individual journey. So everybody's on their own path. And in the journey can involve, you know, starting out denial, sadness, despair, and eventually move on to healing. But it's a journey individually. And so we have families coming in and they might be in different, mom and dad could be in different, or any caregivers could be on different paths in the journey. And so we may misunderstand them. So, and I think my husband even sometimes felt like, why isn't Mary pulling herself up by her bootstrap? I was much more negative, nothing's going to work, in despair. And he was much more like, what are we going to do? Much more action oriented. And so he probably looked more engaged and I looked more unengaged. When we were both very engaged, we were just experiencing a different point in our grief journey, working towards healing. So not only do families misunderstand each other, we misunderstand the families and don't, you know, suspend the judgment about what might be going on here. You can also jump out of order. So you could be on to action and healing and you get a call from the unit saying, little Johnny, you know, cut himself so badly, we have to take him to the hospital for stitches. And you're like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to stop? And, you know, I thought he was doing better. I thought we were going to move on from this. And now here we are again. So there can be things that happen that throw people back into that denial and despair and maybe appearing unengaged for a while because they're licking their wounds. It's hard. Okay. Turn my page here. So I've told you all these things families are going through and what they might be feeling based on my experience and the families I've worked with for 8 years. And so what can you do to help? What might work? What might help? And these are simple things. Listening. Families don't have a lot of people to hear their story. You may think, I don't have time. They told me before, but listening to families and allowing them to share what's happened is very healing. You feel understood when you get to share your story. In collaborative problem solving, the mantra is kids do well if they can, children do well if they can. And we always tell our staff that is true for all of us. We're all going to do well if we can. our families will do well if they can. And if they're not doing well, then maybe there's some barriers, maybe there's some things going on. Maybe there's some skills that are lacking. And so always consider that they would be doing well if they could. I also tell our staff to remember, I think it's a lot easier than thinking, oh, I need to fix or I need to do this, to remember that they're walking alongside the family, they're partners with the family, and that they are consultants. They're really there as consultants for the family, as a resource for the family. Tell them to be practical. Families need practical information. And again, suspending judgment and taking concerns seriously, and try to help address those. Sometimes for clinical staff, what's going on with the family or their concerns may not seem that big in the whole picture of things, but it's big to them. And you need to help them address those things that they're concerned about. Slow down communication. This is one of the things I've run into over and over again. Repeat important information. And this goes even for me as a family support partner, to continue to slow down and repeat important information for families. They are getting so much information. And a lot of times I've had situations where families in with professionals and they're told something like, let's say, it turns out Johnny has a low IQ. And the parents are thinking, oh my goodness, this must be why they haven't done well in school. What if I probably should have done this or that. Meanwhile, the professionals moved on and giving out other information, maybe about a diagnosis that they're looking at. And then they'll say later, the parents will say, I didn't hear that. And they'll say, well, I told them that in that meeting. And families, that information needs to really slow down and be repeated multiple times so that families have an opportunity to absorb it, because they're going through a lot. And like we already talked about, it's pretty overwhelming. They might not have slept. I have notes here and I seem to struggle pulling the last couple of pages apart. So a lot of what we also tell staff, and I think this has been touched on already, is customer service. Greeting people, being warm and friendly, making them feel welcome, making them feel that they're an important part of the team. That's all just customer service, and none of it's hard. Answering the phone, returning phone calls, those things are all important. Support families to learn and progress at their own pace. They're not all gonna go speeding along. Like I said, repeating things, slowing down. So they need to go at their own pace. They're to support their child. Support them to make decisions based on their values and beliefs, and not just on facts and clinical explanations. Help them fold those things together, support them in that. Stay curious, stay really curious about the families. You'll learn a lot, get a lot of insight that way. And then the last thing I wanted to say is one of the things that I found for me that was kind of monumental, and it's stuck in my head with every family that I meet. Tammy Paul, who's a deputy director for Oregon Family Support Network, early in my journey sat in my office and said to me, we need to realize we don't know what we don't know about families. And I've just kept that in my head, because we don't know everything. We don't know that grandma may be dying. We don't know other stressors that have gone on. We don't know a lot of the water that's gone under the bridge in their journey that they might not even be thinking about at this point, because they're dealing with what's going on with their child right now. So I keep that in my head every time, and I love Tammy for sharing that with me. I don't think she's here today, but she's a wonderful, wonderful person. So thank you for letting me share a little bit about what I've learned working with families in residential and with my own experiences. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thanks, Mary. Those are some great tips, especially thinking about from the perspective of the person that's sitting in front of you going through this right now, keeping that. That's fantastic and excellent strategy. So we've heard from parents. It's really important that we also hear from our young adults, because they are the ones that are in those facilities. And they have a lot of knowledge to share about how things can improve, what works and what doesn't work from their perspective. So we're going to welcome Rasheen to speak with us now about.
Hello, all. I thank our presenters for sharing their stories. They were very insightful and very heartfelt. I felt everything that everyone was saying. Yes, my name is Rasheen Marshall. I'm originally from DC. I've been in North Carolina for a number of years now. My residential facility stays were in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. It was about a total of 3 residential facilities that I had been in from my youth days. And it was a doozy. It was a experience like no other. It was very traumatic in a sense, I would say, because I felt like it altered my way of thinking and altered and created someone who you see sitting here today doing this type of work, trying to give those insight on what did work, what did not work, and what I took from the overall experience. So when we talk about what works and what does not work, I feel as though one of the main components is youth voice and choice. You should feel as though they have the control over the narrative of their lives. Youth not having a voice in their lives matter because it empowers the youth and gives meaning and purpose to the challenges that they are working to overcome in their prospective lives. Having a say-so in what goes on provides insight to those trying to help and makes it easier to make the necessary changes and adjustments to what is going on with the youth. When I was living in a residential facility in DC, I did not have a voice, and I should say that to be the least. It was more so that I came in and there were people who I was instructed to trust and that they told me knew what was best for me. I don't remember speaking at all when I first got there. I was still in shock that I have been removed from the only thing that I've ever known in my life, which was my family. Against my will, I did not have a decision to come there. I just woke up one day and they told me to pack my things and that I was going here and we would figure it out from there. I remember it being cold and dull and just being ushered to my room and left there without so much as a hug to tell me that everything was going to be okay. I never got asked my favorite TV shows, movies, sports, what gave me comfort when I was sad or mad, or even something as small as what was my favorite food. When I would have panic attacks, they would take it as having a behavior episode. And there was never an attempt to get to the bottom of the issue of why I was going through these things. If they would have asked me, I would have clearly told them I just miss home. I don't know why I'm here. When am I going home? I feel like I've been abandoned. No one's giving me answers. They're just telling me to do these things and go here because we are the experts and we know. So, in my opinion, giving youth a voice in what goes on in their lives returns the power that was taken from them back to them. Giving youth a choice in the decisions that are made gives them the control they need when they already feel like they have no control. Choices to determine what they eat, what time to sleep, activities that go on, whether it be inside the facility, outside the facility, and a list of other things makes the situation that they're going through less stressful. So what I would say, things that help, that I was in facilities where they were willing to make sure I had consistent contact with my great aunt at the time who raised me, and making sure that I stayed in contact with her and didn't lose that and was able to have conversations with her and kind of get an understanding why I was actually there. It came down to the fact that our family had gone through a traumatic experience where she had just lost her daughter in a fire. And so she was up in age at the time. I believe she was about 56 at the time when I was young then. And so she was left with a granddaughter to raise and a young man who was becoming of age without a male figure in my life to kind of teach me the ropes about being a man and point me in the right direction. I was going through my own thing as a child, recently losing someone that I loved and hold dear to me. And so they would consider it acting out, you would say, where I went from a straight A student and my grades started dropping. I started leaving school and just wandering around the city. And the people that she was trying to get help from was kind of trying to figure out what to do for this 9-year-old kid who is going through this complete turnaround of what he normally is. And so I felt like they didn't never ask me why I was acting like this. It was, let's get him out of here and place him somewhere more secure where we know what to do with him. But the fact that they kept that constant contact with my aunt grounded me in a sense that I could go home away from home. Just hearing her voice gave me comfort in itself. Just her say that she loved me. You're gonna come home one day, that everything is gonna be okay, kept me from so-called tipping over. It stopped the suicidal thoughts that I was having, because I did have those. There were a couple of times I had attempted suicide because the stress and the pain was so deep. I really didn't know how to deal with it. It was all new. And I was a kid, and everybody that I felt like I loved had abandoned me. But they did try. They tried to their utmost ability to make sure that I had those things that I wanted, to keep me grounded. It gave me the mental stress ease to know that I could transport home, even though going home was not in the scope of what I was given at the time. It takes the burden of trying to figure out how to best help the youth by listening to them, giving them an open space to voice their concerns, voice their wants, their hopes and dreams, what they want out of the situation, and what they want their life to look like. Because giving them to the ability to make those choices and voice their opinion is the best way to help. That's the goal at the end of the day. The person that's at the center is the youth. The families have their own burdens and things they go through, and it affects them too. I know it affected my family, me being away from home, me being so young, and them not knowing the decisions to make that they think is right or is the right decision, or where to go next. And looking for help and looking to these people to do the right thing, make sure that their loved one is taken care the best way that they know how, in which is in best interest of the child. Things were done wrong, things could have been better, but I don't take away from the situation, because in the end, it made me who I am. It taught me valuable lessons about how to be steadfast and strong, have courage and keep pushing forward in a time of darkness, and to have that ability and the willingness to learn from the situation and figure out what it is about me that I want to know about myself, and how to relay that information to those in charge, and to make the big decisions so they can properly and effectively help me. And in the end, giving the youth a voice and a choice over their lives will help you feel normal in a not so normal situation. So that's my story. That's why I wanted to share with you guys. Youth voice and choice. And family deserves a voice too. But I think the biggest part is the one that's going through that moment, that experience, their voice matters the most. I want to thank you guys, and I can't wait to answer your questions at the end of our presentations.
Thank you for seeing this, hearing the perspective of a young person who has been in this situation. It's jarring to me, jarring. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I know it's impactful for everybody that's here, as well as, our families as well. Resonates with them.
Thank you for giving me
Michelle,
this space to express myself.
you're very welcome. Thank you for being here. Michelle, what would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you for everything that's been said so far. I really resonate, especially with the stories of the parents and also Rashim. I'm happy to be here with you all. My name is Michelle Vance. I'm an advocate for youth and I work as a program specialist for Youth Move National. I'm here to speak with you all a little bit about my lived experience in residential placements within the mental health system. I spent time in 3 separate residential placements before the age of 19. And I also spent time living in a juvenile detention when I was 16 years old. I was adopted from the foster care system. I lived with a fair amount of trauma from the time before I was adopted. I'm someone who just has really big feelings, and it took me a long time to learn how to deal with suicidal ideation. The time I spent in these treatment centers had a big impact on my life. Like Rashim said, it was foundational, and I do believe that it changed me as a person. I'm definitely here doing this work because of these experiences and because I believe that we can make the system better. I believe that there is room for change and that there's a direct path and we have the knowledge to get there. We can get there. The things that helped me the most were consistent communication and visitation with my family and knowing when I was leaving to return home. For me, I think that visitation should occur in a private setting. 2 out of the 3 of the residential treatment centers I was in had these big like fishbowl windows around the visitation room. For me, this resulted in the majority of my time spent um, with my family gossiping about the other patients. Now, I'd like to say as a mother, I would have done differently, but I think it really just kind of helped to deflect from the tension that we were feeling. But it wasn't good for me to hear my family say those things about my peers. On the flip side, my family all looks very different from each other because we're all adopted. And so in turn, that also led all the patients to say some things that weren't so great about my family directly to me. I would have preferred that those people had not seen my family and that my family had not seen that we would have had that privacy. So it also made my family just very uncomfortable when they could hear people screaming or swearing. It made them all uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable too, but it became something that I lived with on a day-to-day basis, but I could see how jarring it was to them when they came and it was not a secluded area to be in. And that was hard for me because I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable. I did notice that those places where we didn't have a private place to meet, my family didn't come visit me as often. And that was hard for me. These treatment centers for me, they didn't feel safe. They weren't a place for healing. They did serve their place in the system, right? I'm still here today for a reason. But the idea that you're going to come to this new place and live in close quarters with so many unpredictable people, that you're expected to share a room with a stranger and having a light shined in your eyes every night, waking up and you don't know who's going to be standing in your room. I think that most people, even healthy people, would struggle to survive to live in that environment, let alone someone who had come from such a place of trauma as myself. For this reason, knowing when I was leaving was a beacon of hope. It was very important to me. It was on my calendar. It was something I looked forward to every day. It wasn't just being able to snack when I wanted. It was being home with my family. And so what helped me was knowing when I would get out and when I would be with my family again. And I think we need to really have reasonable expectations for what wellness and stability look like, given all of these external factors that are just going to be a part of the residential treatment experience, right? I think it's important to really stick to the timelines that are given to youth and to their families about release dates. I didn't mention before, but I was a part of Medicaid funded programs in Utah. So I think, maybe some of the dates were more flexible because of that. But yeah, my placements, my residential experience all happened in Utah. One thing that I just want to talk about briefly is inappropriate staff. I think in every residential placement I spent time in, I had interactions with inappropriate staff. I was forcefully sedated when speaking up for myself. And I came to these centers with trauma already, so these methods, they did not help me. The reality of this type of work is that it can attract people who are there not for altruistic reasons. I'm an advocate for peer support specialists within residential programs because the only time I had a voice to share about the way I was mistreated was because of someone working in that position. There was someone at the residential center who was specifically there to looking for my feedback. They were listening to folks' suggestions, and they were there to improve it for our benefit. So it was somebody that took the time to ask, and I said, well, if you want to make it better, there's certain things that need to be handled. There are certain people that shouldn't be working here. That happened at one of the 3 centers that I worked at. The other 2, it did not. I think if you're in a position to allow for anonymous feedback at a residential facility, I would highly recommend that you create a process to do so. I'm somebody who would have done that, who would have taken advantage of that. Just because I live with depression, it doesn't mean that I shouldn't have a voice in how I am treated, and the same with the other youth in the facilities. We see it happening. We can be a voice for ourselves, and we can be a voice for our peers. For those looking at also genuinely engaging youth in their families, I urge you to take a look at the existing rules, the existing policies and procedures within your organizations. Are they there for a therapeutic reason, or are they there to keep power and control over patients? The majority of conflict that I was personally a part of and that I watched other teenagers engage in, those conflicts ended with one of us, with a teenager, having an assault charge or being sedated into a windowless room. But from my perspective, these were situations that resulted from things that didn't really matter in the big picture. They were situations that were also usually escalated by staff because of rigid rules that they don't exist in real life. You know, since I have left these treatment centers, I have not come across tape on the ground as a line for anything. But if you're going to have a power struggle, you know, that's a good way to start it. So I would just really urge you to take a look at, why do we do things the way we do? Can they be done differently? If many youth are struggling with the same part of your program or about your living facility, maybe stop to ask why, and just believe youth. Start to believe them, and really listen to their experience. The last thing I really want to talk about is just the need for parental advocacy within care. I would really, again, ask also parents to ask, why is something done the way it is, especially if it's not working. I'd like to share just a short story about how my mom advocated for me in one of my placements. One of my placements I lived in, we were forced to wear all gray everything. It was provided by the program until you leveled up to earn things back. I'm not sure the logic there. But we had gray sweats, gray shirts, gray shoes. And during a misunderstanding at rec time, I got punched in the nose and I had blood all over my gray shoes. I was not allowed to wear my own shoes. And when my mom came to visit, she saw the blood-stained shoes. She demanded that I get new shoes, or to just simply wear my own shoes that I came in with. I do understand, you know, the concerns with the shoelaces, right? And some of the other patients, I do understand. But my mom, how she advocated for me in this situation is she waited with me there for over an hour. She refused to leave until she saw that I had the new shoes. She had to speak to several people, and they eventually apologized to my mom. They didn't apologize to me, but they did give me the new gray shoes, right? So I was able to solve that problem. And I know that this story is kind of jarring, especially to just mention it casually, but I think it really illustrates, you know, that someone needs to be speaking up for these people and why consistent visitation is so important. I was never going to tell my mom that on the phone. I didn't want her to know that that had happened, but I did want other shoes. I definitely wanted some new shoes. So other ways I think that parents can be an advocate for their youth are in therapy and medication decisions, sincerely listening to youth about what's harming them, and bringing up a youth's concerns. You know, just because it happens all the time doesn't mean it needs to be happening. The last thing that I would like to share with you all today is that the biggest thing that helped me during my time in the centers aside from my family support, aside from, that beacon of hope of when I would be getting out, were good staff. I still to this day remember the names and the faces of the people who treated me with consistency, with kindness, who instilled hope in me at a time when I really need it. I still have notes to this day that some of those people wrote me. I still look back to them when I need hope, and I have connected with some of these people as an adult, and they are a part of my support system now. And so I think just to end right there and send it back to Millie, just a lot of feelings you can tell, right? It was a very impactful experience, and I'm very happy that we're able to share that with you all today.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for sharing things that are still painful, as well as how some people who impacted you positively then continue to be a part of your life. That's helpful to me. So we've heard from everybody here a number of just really important points. Our kids are at important developmental stages when they're centers, and that's something I don't think has been at the forefront of my mind until you started bringing those things up. And it's their foundational year, and the importance of peer support, both youth and parents, to have someone to walk with you, someone to talk to, and having a choice in how things go for you. People knowing you for who you are and not what your diagnosis is or the reason why you were in a place. There have been some excellent strategies shared today that come from a point of true lived experience, traumatic experiences, not so good experiences, and really good experiences. And the research plays out. We need to make a change. Something needs to be different to really partner with youth and families. So I'm going to open it up now. If anyone would like to ask a question, make a comment, open up a discussion point, you can, I hope you guys are, the panelists, you're able to see what's been happening in the chat. There's a lot of support for you and a lot of appreciation for being willing to share. If anybody would like to use the raise your hand feature and ask a question to any of our panelists or of Kayla, now would be the time. You can also put something in the chat box and I'm happy to read it out. I'll give you a moment to do that. I did tell our panelists that you would want to hear, you would want to be involved. Yes, Jaleesa, you have your hand up. I hope I said your name right.
Quick question. I just wanted to know, so you guys talked about the frequent home visits. I know I used to work in residential care, and one of the reasons we don't send, or didn't at that time, send kids home was they go home, they get into trouble, or they start using again, and then they come back to the center and it's like starting from ground zero. So what are some things that could be put into place that could prevent that or address that issue?
Would anyone like to respond? Jen?
I'll respond. I think maybe my daughter came home every weekend, and I was so grateful for that. I mean, it was used as a, she had to earn it. But I think, and my daughter, unfortunately did use drugs, so I understand your question. Obviously, having maybe someone from the home provide support to that parent prior to the child going back home into that environment about how to curb those things. Again, it's always engagement of the caregiver and with the clinical team and staff. And yeah, it probably takes a little bit longer when you allow that weekend visitation, because there are setbacks, but it also helps the family understand how to handle these situations, which is so important. It's critical that the family learn how to manage those things in order to have a successful transition.
Mary, did you also want to respond?
Yeah, we do home visits and find them really helpful for families, because if there is going to be some kind of a stumble, we want to know that now before they permanently go home. We want to be able to practice that. So we can help the family. We're usually available by phone. They can call in and get advice, including the youth can call in and talk with a trusted staff about, my son did that when he came home. He'd talk with someone and they would encourage him to use skills that he had been using in treatment. But I think they're really important, and we do a lot of them for kids, unless we really feel like there's a large safety concern, like self-harm, hurting themselves while on a home visit. But we work towards that. Like, we may do shorter ones and then longer ones to get families. They need to practice, and sometimes some of our kids have come in and they've been in different treatment facilities along the way, haven't been home in a long time, and so everybody's kind of walking on eggshells, and we want to get some practice. So I think they're really important, and we find them very helpful.
You do have to practice at home too, and use new skills at home, just like a young person may be learning new skills in the facility.
Yeah, I was practicing.
Yeah. Tiffany?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think that home passes are an opportunity to give messages to our families and the youth, especially, that we trust in the work that's happening. We trust in their involvement in their treatment. And then how do we then protect their progress, right? How do we tease out the kinks? How do we work with them? And how do we involve them in the safety plan and practicing that at home and from what they're learning while being in the facility? So I think not having home passes is another message, right? It's a message to our youth that we're not so sure you're capable. And we really want to boost that empowerment and say, hey, let's do this together. Let's involve you in that plan.
Absolutely. Rashim?
Yes, I see a question in the chat box of what do me and Michelle think about the sleeping areas? Do you think it's better for a young person to be in a private room or have a roommate, or would it make sense that the youth have a choice to be allowed to choose? I would say the latter, giving them a choice to choose if it is an option to do so. Because if it's a structure and it's not that much space and you really have to be with someone in the room, I would say if that was the case, then making sure that the person that they're going to be spending the most time around in regards to being in a vulnerable state, like sleep, because that is a vulnerable state, you will make sure that those two people are compatible with each other. I know that in my experience, I had issues with certain roommates. We were just two different backgrounds, two different ideals. We carried ourselves two different ways, and so there was a natural tension to clash. And so they had to figure out a way to find someone who I was compatible with, which they ended up doing so. Someone who was reserved and quiet like me, stayed to themselves. They like the same things. They like to read like me. We like the same music. Our stories are kind of similar. So it was something to relate to when we were in that area and that space. So I would say give the youth a choice if that is possible. And if it's not possible, to have them pick whether they want to have their own room or whether they want to be with somebody, then the next step would be to find compatibility in regards to a roommate for them, so that those type of issues in regards to incompatibility won't arise as much. Now, you can't prevent everything because always something comes, but it's more easier to put out the fire with something that you know that's compatible with something that's not. So that's my answer to that question.
Michelle, did you want to respond to that, or give a couple other questions as well?
Yeah, I see another one. I would always prefer to have my own room, but I think also I just imagine a normal bedroom. So if I'm getting half of a room with walls enclosed, I don't know, my answer might change, but for safety reasons, at least as an adult, I would always want a locked room if possible. I understand, the safety precautions with that, but if I had my own choice, it would just be me. I see another question that we have in here for myself and Rasheen, which is, sorry, it just moved. What would you tell family support specialists supporting the parents and caregivers? What is critical for them to understand and know when working towards inpatient treatment for their youth? So I'll let Rasheen answer this, and then I just commented in the chat box to save some time there.
And there are
Um,
questions in there if you guys want to respond to some of those in the chat, and then we've got a couple people with their hands up. Go ahead, Rasheen.
yeah, what I would tell providers for them to understand would just be to just that understand. I mean, to go through something like that is probably one of the most traumatic things that I think that has ever happened to me. It gave me a total outlook on certain things, and it kind of changed the trajectory of where I was going in life, and it kind of molded me in a certain sense. So just having that understanding, like this is a very sensitive situation, that's what you see in front of you is what's just been given to them, and they're just letting it come out and express themselves. It might not be always the positive. It might come out in anger. It might come out in impulsiveness. It might come out in the ability to not be able to open up and talk. But it's just because that trauma has done something on the inside that prevents them from being them true and normal selves. And just working through that and identifying those issues, um, acknowledging that you see those issues, to let them know that you are on the same page with them and you know what they're feeling, and it makes it easier to overcome those. I think that's the biggest thing providers should know, is just empathy. Express empathy. That's that we're not looking to be fixed. We're not looking to be coddled. We're not looking to feel like you're a charity case. Just be empathetic to what I'm going through, understand, and then just give me ideas and help me get through this traumatic time until I'm able to sustain my own emotional um, intelligence, and then go forward with my day-to-day process and develop those processes. Um, I would say that. Michelle, did you have anything? Because I seen another question I wanted to address as well.
Michelle, let's go ahead.
Let me see, where did it go?
And after that, Emma and I'm gonna secure your name, Camu. Want to get, and we're over time, but if everybody's okay with staying on here, I
Yeah.
think we keep it for a little bit.
Just really quick, do you ever truly forgive your families? Yeah, it took a while. I kind of blamed my family for the events that happened in my life for a long time. I've even expressed this to them, like even my mom, and just a host of family members who I felt like didn't come to my aid, didn't come to my rescue. I did, of course, everybody has their own lives, and they do the best that they can. But for me, going through what I was going through, I felt like someone could have came. Anybody could have came. Whether it was my mom who was going through what she was going through and an inability to do that, whether it was my aunt trying her hardest to get me back from the situation I was in, whether it was my brothers, my uncles, my grandparents, someone should have came. Someone should have cared enough to put the effort forward to make sure that I was okay. And it wasn't done, and I did blame them for a while. But one day I had came to the realization that I can't keep blaming them, because everyone has their own lives and the things that they're dealing with. And we had those conversations because I wouldn't talk about it. It was kind of like the elephant in the room when we had to go to family reunions, and it's just like, hey, my uncles used to always say, man, I wish I could have done something. And I would, on the inside, I'd be mad and I'd be looking at them like, you could have did something. But, I just didn't understand what everybody was at in their life point, and it just didn't match up to what I wanted at that time frame. And I wish I could have gotten it, but by hearing it, I understood more and was able to forgive. So I think, yeah, forgiveness, um, it would come. It would just come with time, and you working on yourself and coming to the acceptance of what it was and what it is, and things along that nature. It's not an easy journey. Trust me. It took me about 15 years to forgive, but I finally did. So
Thank you. So let's take Emma's question and Amu's question, and then we'll close up. There are several other questions I'm sorry we didn't get to in the chat. There's one particularly about starting a peer support, a youth peer support specialist program, Michelle, that you may want to respond to. I would just say reach out to Youth Move because they're good at that. Emma, what is your question or comment?
Hi. Okay, so first I wanted to say thank you to both Rashim and Michelle for just like speaking their experience. I was very inspired and related. And I completely forgot that they had tape that they made us stand in line on until Michelle brought it up. So thank you for that memory. But it was actually my question where I was asking, and this is for anyone, if there's any advice that you would give to either a local organization or anything that is trying to start youth peer support groups inside of residential facilities or just in care facilities. I think we're all in agreement that that would be extremely beneficial.
Well, the one thing is there are certain requirements in most states. I'm not sure if I'm going to get this right. You might have to correct me, Millie, for folks to have peer support as a part of care. So kind of already at a good place there. So if you have peer support specialists involved, I think kind of a longer answer, but definitely something that Youth Move National is working on that we'll have some guidance on. So I would say to follow up, my email is just Michelle, MICHELLE, at youthmovenational.org, and we'll have more conversations because I have some questions for you about what it currently looks like and kind of how to build from there. But I do think it's just really important, I think, as everyone said from before.
Peer support is just critical. So if you want a further conversation about parent peer support, I'm mqueenie at fredluff.org. And you can always reach out to us about that as well. Camu, I think I say your name different every time I say it.
That's okay. It's Kamu, and you said absolutely correct. I wanted to thank everyone for sharing their stories today. There was something specifically mentioned that, as a family partner, I'm always seeking ways as to how I can better support parents, as my story may be similar to theirs, but it is their story and they're living it. And so my experience comes from that hard place of being a parent and having to consider or be in the works of, your child and making that hard decision in terms of residential placement. And I think it was Jasmine, and please, if I'm incorrect, Jasmine, I think you mentioned something that I was really curious about and wanting to get some more learning, which is how to best support a parent whose child has had a traumatic experience in that treatment and still has to make a decision to continue. How can I best support parents? I can say I can always speak my story and how hard those decisions were, but I really seek to know, what else other ideas are out there in terms of helping that parent.
Thank you so much. It's such a delicate topic for sure, especially when we're talking about the amount of restorative work that has to be done when a youth comes home without traumatic events happening while they're in a facility, much less you add that into the equation. I think for me, it was really important to be, and as I support parents and caregivers who walk through this as well, is really being as transparent as possible with my son every step of the way and involving him in the decisions, and explaining to him why I felt that we needed to move in this direction. So ultimately, my son was able to sign the voluntary. He was voluntary. And I think part of that is really for him, the trauma, he didn't experience trauma until he went into a facility. For him, it was organic mental illness that led to the first residential. And so the combination, I think, is really important to kind of tease out. But for me, it was around being as transparent as possible, empowering my son to help him understand why we feel it's safe and helpful for him, and what that's going to look like every step of the way, including taking him on a tour, including talking to him about what do snacks look like, what do visits look like, and really humanizing my son in the process was really important, and I think helpful, and really involving him in the conversations, his concerns, his thoughts, and the like. I made my name my email if you would like to connect further on that. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I think that's the biggest part, is really being as transparent with my own concerns, my own aching in this trajectory, and why I feel, and including him in that process.
We are over time, but I know Kelly has something that she wants to say. So I'm gonna let her say it, and then we'll need to close up. We probably should have made this a 2-hour session.
So I have a question for the individuals that experienced the residential treatment. When they create a treatment plan, I've heard repeatedly that it's very important for family, or for not only for family voice, but also for the youth's voice to be heard. In creating a treatment plan, we often come across youth who really don't know how to interpret that or how to create goals for themselves. So from your perspective, what types of questions or ways can that question be presented to these youth to have them feel like there's a more interactive situation, or that they really are important in that planning process, and it's not just the adults around them making the decisions based on how they were placed into the residential treatment centers?
Yeah, I think because I know we were over time, so I could answer this a little bit more fully, but I think to ask me, but to also provide examples of what other folks have done. Also to accept my answer the first time. I felt like I was often questioned or asked things 3-4 times because I chose the wrong thing the first time. So I think especially in, those times of distress, if you can just take my first answer, it provide me with out of the box ideas, but also things that have worked for other people. And I'll let Rashim answer if he'd like to as well.
Oh no, you hit it right on the head. You took the words right out of my mouth. Took the words right out of my mouth. I would second everything that you said, because that's exactly how I feel about it as well.
I'm going to go ahead and close this up. This has been probably one of the most impactful webinars I've ever been a part of. So I appreciate so much your time and your expertise, and for everyone that hung on and asked those questions. We have, please fill out the survey, because that lets us know what works and what doesn't for you, and what impact can bring to you, like things like this. And in the chat, there was a suggestion about maybe we need a community of practice around this next year for intact facilitate. And so, that may be something we may look into. So thank you very much for attending today, for being part of this. And thank you very much to our panelists and to Kayla for being devoted to this research and bringing this forward, for everyone for sharing their stories. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day, and it has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.